On a cold January morning in 1943, a maid at the Hotel New Yorker knocked on the door of room 3327. There was no answer. When she finally entered, she found an old man lying alone on the bed. His pockets were nearly empty. His belongings fit into a few trunks. He had been living off small checks and the kindness of a hotel that let him stay despite years of unpaid bills. And yet, the ideas that had come out of this man's mind were, at that very moment, lighting up entire cities, powering factories across continents, and quietly running the machinery of the modern world. His name was Nikola Tesla. He had imagined the future before anyone else could see it. He had handed humanity the blueprint for the electric age, and he died with almost nothing. How does the man who builds the future end up forgotten by it? How do the people who came after him become household names, billion-dollar brands, industrial titans, while he becomes a ghost in a hotel room? That is the story we're about to tell, and it's stranger, sadder, and more relevant than you might think. To understand how Tesla ended up alone in that hotel room, you have to understand that he was never really an ordinary scientist. From the time he was a child in a small village in what is now Croatia, his mind worked in a way that almost no one around him could comprehend. He didn't sketch his inventions on paper first. He built them in his head. He could picture a machine, spin it around in his imagination, run it, watch it operate, and then identify which part would fail before he ever touched a tool. He claimed he could see his designs so vividly that they felt as real as the room around him. As a young man, he became obsessed with electricity. Not the way an engineer is obsessed with a problem to solve, but the way a poet is obsessed with a vision. To Tesla, electricity wasn't just a force to be harnessed for lighting a bulb or running a motor. It was something almost spiritual, a hidden language of the universe, a key that could unlock human potential on a scale no one had imagined. He didn't want to be rich. He wanted to liberate humanity from drudgery, from darkness, from the limitations of distance. He believed that if you could move energy freely across the world, you could change what it meant to be alive. The kind of mind doesn't fit easily into a boardroom, and in a way, that's the seed of everything that went wrong. When Tesla arrived in America in 1884, the country was in the middle of its first great electrical revolution, and one man stood at the center of it. Thomas Edison had already become a national icon. He had patents, factories, financiers, and most importantly, a system already in the ground. That system ran on direct current, or DC, and it had a critical flaw. It could only travel short distances before losing power, which meant cities would need power stations on nearly every block. Tesla saw a different path. He believed in alternating current, AC, which could travel hundreds of miles with far less loss. It was more efficient, more scalable, and ultimately more practical for an industrializing world. But this wasn't just a debate between two engineers about which technology was better. This was a war over money, reputation, and the future of an entire industry. Edison had everything Tesla didn't. He had a brand. He had the press. He had investors. And when Tesla's ideas threatened the system Edison had built his empire on, Edison fought back, sometimes brutally, with public demonstrations designed to make AC look dangerous and unstable. Tesla, meanwhile, had only one weapon. He had ideas that were simply better. And in the long run, that turned out to be enough to win the technical war. But winning the technical war and winning the financial war are two very different things. By the early 1890s, Tesla's vision was beginning to reshape the world. His designs for the AEC induction motor and his system of polyphase electrical transmission gave engineers a way to do something that had seemed impossible just a decade earlier. Send electricity across vast distances and put it to useful work at the other end. Then came the moment that should have made him untouchable. In 1895, Tesla's system was chosen to harness the power of Niagara Falls, transmitting electricity all the way to the city of Buffalo, more than 20 miles away. It was the proof the world needed. It was the moment when the future stopped being a theory and became a fact. Factories could now be built far from rivers. Cities could be lit on a scale never seen before. The age of mass electrification, of modern industry, of the kind of life we now take for granted had officially begun, and it was running on Tesla's blueprint. At this point in the story, you'd expect Tesla to become one of the richest men in the world. The technology was his. The patents existed. The demand was exploding. He was, by any reasonable measure, the architect of an entire industry. But this is exactly where the story takes a sharp, painful turn. Tesla had two qualities that made him a great inventor and a terrible businessman. He was a dreamer, and he trusted people. When he had partnered with George Westinghouse to bring his AC system to the world, he had agreed to a royalty deal that, on paper, would have made him extraordinarily wealthy. But when Westinghouse's company hit financial trouble and warned Tesla that paying out those royalties might bankrupt them, Tesla did something almost unbelievable. He tore up the contract. He let go of payments that, by some estimates, could have amounted to a fortune that would dwarf the wealth of most industrialists of his era. He did it because he believed his system mattered more than his bank account. He believed the mission was bigger than the man, and the world quietly took him at his word. While Tesla was thinking about humanity, other people were thinking about ownership. They were filing patents around his patents. They were building companies, locking up markets, structuring deals, shaping industries that would outlast all of them. Tesla wanted to give the world a gift. The world, or at least the people running it, was happy to take that gift and put a price tag on it. But here's the part that's really hard to accept. Losing the royalties wasn't even the worst of it, because Tesla didn't just walk away from the money he'd already earned. He took everything he had left, every ounce of credibility, every connection, every dollar he could borrow, and he poured it into a dream so ambitious that even today, more than a century later, we still haven't fully realized it. And that dream is what finally broke him. The dream had a name: Wardenclyffe. On the north shore of Long Island, Tesla began building a tower unlike anything the world had ever seen. He believed he could transmit electrical power through the Earth itself, sending energy wirelessly to any point on the planet. Not just signals, not just messages, actual usable power. Imagine it for a second. A farmer in a remote village turning on a light without ever stringing a wire. A ship in the middle of the ocean drawing energy out of the air. Information flowing freely, instantly between continents. This wasn't just a product. It was a reimagining of how civilization itself would work. Tesla persuaded the financier J.P. Morgan to fund the project. But here's where the dream collided with reality. Morgan, like all great financiers, didn't ask, "Will this work?" He asked, "How do we charge people for it?" If energy could flow freely through the air, how exactly would you put a meter on it? How would you bill someone for power they could just pull out of the ground? When Morgan realized that Tesla's vision was beautiful precisely because it couldn't be easily controlled or monetized, the funding dried up. And once the money stopped, the tower stopped. It stood there for years, half-built, an enormous skeleton against the Long Island sky, until it was eventually torn down and sold for scrap. The dream of a wirelessly powered planet went down with it. And so did Tesla. After Wardenclyffe, the story becomes harder to watch. Tesla still had ideas. He still had visions. He talked about death rays, resonance weapons, technologies that could transmit thought, machines that could see at a distance. Some of these ideas were genuinely ahead of their time. Others were probably the products of a brilliant mind under enormous strain. But the public didn't make those distinctions. The press, which had once celebrated him as a wizard, started treating him as an eccentric. He gave interviews about communicating with other planets, and the headlines grew more mocking. Investors stopped returning his calls. Universities offered honors, but no real income. He moved from hotel to hotel, often unable to pay, surviving on the goodwill of staff who recognized that whoever he had become, he had once given the world something extraordinary. He spent his last years feeding pigeons in the parks of New York. The man who had electrified Niagara Falls, who had imagined a wireless planet decades before Wi-Fi, was now a thin, lonely figure in a worn-out coat, talking to birds. When he died in that hotel room in January 1943, he left behind notebooks, theories, debts, and very little else. And yet, here is the cruel arithmetic of history. The principles Tesla developed, the AC system, the induction motor, the foundational ideas of wireless transmission did not die with him. They became the spine of the 20th century. Every time a factory hummed to life, every time a refrigerator kicked on, every time a radio crackled across an ocean, his ideas were doing the work. The industries built on top of those ideas, the electrical utilities, the appliance giants, the broadcasting empires, the entire infrastructure of modern communication generated wealth on a scale that is almost incomprehensible. Fortunes were made, dynasties were built, entire stock markets were reshaped around the things Tesla had once sketched in his head and given away. His name, after decades of relative obscurity, was eventually rehabilitated. Today you can see it on cars, on units of measurement, on textbooks, on monuments. But none of that reached him while he was alive. The lesson hidden in his story is uncomfortable. The question that really matters in any age of innovation is not just who invented it. The question is, who controls the value of what was invented? Tesla answered the first question better than almost anyone in history. He never figured out the second. So what do we do with a story like this? It would be easy to say that Tesla died poor because he was naive, or because he was outmaneuvered, or because the world is simply unfair to dreamers. And there's truth in all of that. But I think the deeper lesson is harder. Tesla didn't die poor because he lacked genius. He died poor because genius, on its own, isn't enough in a world that runs on capital, ownership, and commercial leverage. A great idea is fragile. Without protection, without strategy, without partners who share your values rather than just your patents, an idea can be lifted out of your hands and turned into someone else's empire while you're still working on the next one. Tesla wanted to give humanity a gift. Humanity, in the end, accepted the gift but forgot the giver, at least for a long time. Still, there's something to be said for the way he lost. Most of the financiers who profited from his work are remembered today, if at all, as footnotes. Tesla is remembered as a visionary. He may have died in a small hotel room with empty pockets, but the world he imagined, a world wired with energy, connected by invisible signals, powered by forces he was the first to truly understand, that world is the one we now live in. In that sense, he won. Just not in the way the world usually keeps score. So I want to leave you with a question because I genuinely don't think there's an easy answer. Was Tesla a genius betrayed by a system that punishes idealism? Or was he a man so committed to his vision that he refused to play the game well enough to protect it? Was he a victim? Or was he, in some strange way, exactly the kind of person the world needed, even if it cost him everything? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if this story moved you, stick around, because next time we're going to look at the inventors whose ideas were quietly stolen, and the geniuses who died just before the world finally understood what they had been trying to say. Until then, take a moment to think about the names we don't remember and the futures they built anyway.